Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm very excited to be hosting you for our second session in our mini series, Our Role Models in Action. Alhamdulillah. So we hope you had the chance to catch the first session this past Sunday that we had last night with Brother Hassam. He held a very engaging presentation on women in Islamic history. So if you haven't had a chance to catch that live stream, we would very much encourage you to go to Nisa Helpline Facebook page and catch the recording, inshallah. You will not want to miss it. So since October is Islamic History Month, we are taking some time to explore the many women role models around us, past and present, who inspire us to be the best we can be, bi'idhnillah. So without further ado, inshallah, we are joined this evening by our honored guest, Dr. Monarahman, a role model in her own right, to further discuss the lessons we can learn from the contributions of our modern day women role models. So before I introduce Dr. Rahman, I'd encourage everybody to share and like the stream this evening, as well as post any comments and questions in the Facebook comment section. And inshallah, we will do our best towards the end of the program to share your comments and your questions with Dr. Rahman. So a little bit about Dr. Monarahman, inshallah, before we hand over the floor to her. Mashallah, tabarakallah. She has an extensive and very impressive resume, mashallah. She was a graduate student at Queen's University, receiving both her BC honors and PhD in biochemistry. She subsequently trained as a postdoctorate fellow in the vascular biology group at the Robarts Research Institute. It's a bit of a mouthful, but mashallah. And also attained a second postdoctoral fellowship in structural biology. Mashallah. So Dr. Monarahman also is currently the coordinator of the research activities and communications in the Vice Principal Research Portfolio, and is also a member of UCARE, the University Committee for Anti-Racism and Equity. So outside of the university, it's not all folks, you know, outside of her university role and her role in academia, mashallah, Dr. Mona is also a busy mother raising two very active children. And she also just finished a 6-year tenure as an education coordinator at the Kingston Islamic Society of Kingston, mashallah. So she has been working with children and youth in the Muslim community since her undergraduate days. And she frequently speaks about various topics in local schools and on campus as a member of the Da'wah committee. So mashallah, very active in the Da'wah community as well. And just lastly, we'd like to mention as well that in addition to her scientific publications, she has contributed a chapter entitled Activism, A Part of Life, in a collection of essays entitled Muslim Women Activists in North America, Speaking for Ourselves, edited by fellow Queen's alumna, Dr. Catherine Bullock. So welcome, mashallah, tabarakallah, welcome Dr. Monarahman. And I'd like everyone to please join me in welcoming Dr. Monarahman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That was a very generous introduction, mashallah, and I don't live up to that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So to begin with, I need to acknowledge that I am situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. To acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize its longer history, one predating the establishment of the earliest European colonies, and to acknowledge its significance to the indigenous peoples who have lived and continue to live upon it, which includes its Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee roots, but also a significant Métis community and First Peoples from other nations across Turtle Island. We are grateful to be able to live and learn, play and pray on these lands, to grow and interact with those of diverse backgrounds. And personally, as a Muslim woman, I also acknowledge the responsibility given to us by Al-Khaliq, the Creator, to protect these lands and respect all who live upon them. So I was asked to speak about the role models around us and how we can use the history to flourish in the present, and mentioning, the role models, women role models we have in our present, and the lessons we can learn from the past. But I'd first like to remind ourselves that personally, I was born and raised in Canada. I was born and raised in Kingston, and many, I'm sure, have been raised in Kingston, but we are currently living here in Canada. So I'd like to remind you that on October 18th, 1918, women were declared persons in Canada. We were not declared persons in this country that we live in until 1918. We were declared persons in Islam at the beginning of time. Muslim women have been persons honestly, from the beginning of time. And if you look at the media today and how things are portrayed about Muslim women, unless, of course, you watch Zarqa or Little Mosque on the Prairie, and if you look at how things are for some women in some of the Muslim predominant countries, it is actually hard to say what the status of women is in Islam. Because unfortunately, through colonialism, that has been permeated throughout the world, colonialism has resulted in the installation of patriarchal societies, just like it has here in Canada. And what happened there is that it took education away from women so that they don't know their rights. If you do not know your rights, you do not know what you're missing. And what has happened is that Muslim societies are forgetting Islam, and especially the rights owed to half of the community. So like I said, I grew up in Kingston, very small town, but it's an academic town. And when I was growing up, it was a small but multicultural Muslim community, mostly academic. And our parents, so my father came as a graduate student. So academics meaning faculty and students. Our parents tried to teach us about Islamic principles from first principles, not dependent on what country you are from, but from what Islam says are the principles. So our generation, both the boys and the girls, the male and the female, were raised with the same principles, with the expectation, as in an academic town, you had an expectation to get an education and to be contributing and productive members of the community, both Muslim, but as well the greater community. So we were raised with the understanding of what gender equity is in Islam, inshallah. We hope. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them for that. And one of the central caveats in our deen is that men and women are partners and protectors of each other. We have this in Surah Tawbah, Ayah 71. The believers, men and women, are protectors one of another. They enjoin what is just and forbid what is evil. They observe regular prayers, practice regular charity, and they obey Allah and His Messenger. On them will Allah pour His mercy, for Allah is exalted in power wise. That, to me, is the central tenet of the status of women in Islam. Both of women in Islam. Both women and men have the same reward for doing good deeds. We both have the same punishment for bad deeds. Everyone is accountable for how he or she lives in this life on the day of judgment. That being said, yes, we have rights and duties, some of which are not the same, but they're complementary based on our different natures and capabilities. Not everybody can be a mother. The men can't be the mother, the men can be the father. So there are some rights that women have that are duties for men to uphold, and there are some rights that men have that are duties for women to uphold. But at the end of the day, there is gender equity in Islam. Unfortunately, we are not seeing this in practice around the world. Yes, there are some places that are striving for this. There are other places that are not, and that has to do with the human weakness and with respect to that. So when we were growing up, the role models that we were taught about were those, and if you really want to see what Islam says, we look at what the women were like at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So of course, and if you look at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the early Muslims, you can see the prominent roles that women played. First and foremost, our mother Khadija, radiallahu anha, Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the first person who accepted Islam. She was known to be, okay, let's count down, a noble and wealthy businesswoman in a male-dominated world of business, twice widowed. She was his boss. She was the Prophet ﷺ's employer. When he was 25 and she was 40, she was so impressed by his character and honesty that she proposed marriage to him. She was 15 years his senior, and she proposed marriage to him. So we have a businesswoman shattered the glass ceiling 1400 years ago. She was super wealthy, and she basically managed her own affairs, even the person that she wanted to marry. When he received the first revelation and thought he was going mad, what did he do? He ran from the cave of Hira, and he ran to Khadija, radiallahu anha, and asked her to cover him. And what did she do? She comforted him. She took him to his cousin Waraqah, a Christian, and she took him there to help him understand what was going on. And he confirmed that you are a prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He confirmed this based on the earlier scriptures. What else? I mean, woman was a businesswoman. She was wealthy. She was the major financier of the mission, using her wealth to support the early Muslims during the time of the boycott where no one would trade with them. No one would help them. It was Khadija, radiallahu anha, who supported the Muslims. She was his only wife until she passed away after 25 years of marriage. And she is included amongst the 4 best women of Jannah, along with her daughter, Fatima bint Muhammad, Maryam bint Imran, and Asiya bint Muzahim. The qualities that Khadija radiallahu anha exhibited over 1400 years ago are the things that women are still fighting for today in Canada. So another one of our role models, if you look at it, is the first person to be martyred in Islam. The first person to be martyred in Islam was also a woman named Sumayya bint Khabbat. And she suffered, and she had so much patience. She suffered so much torture, but would not renounce her killed. We forget when we're talking about women's roles in the military in North America, we forget that women nursed the wounded in battles, and they also participated in the battlefield like Nusayba bint Ka'b. Nusayba bint Ka'b was one of the 2 women present at the second pledge of Aqaba. The second pledge of Aqaba, before the Prophet went to Medina. During the Battle of Uhud, she was there tending to the wounded, bringing water to the soldiers, but then when things went down, when the battle turned upside down, she grabbed her weapons and she fought to defend the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We don't need Wonder Woman. We have Nusayba bint Ka'b. And she wasn't the only one. Umar bin Khattab said that the Prophet once told him that in the Battle of Uhud, wherever he turned, whether it was to the right or to the left, he saw Umar. He saw Nusayba fighting to defend him. And of course, she was wounded multiple times. Another one of my role models, and it is someone, because I teach Quran, and mashallah, some of my students are at Surah Al-Mujadala, they get to hear about the story of Khawala bint Thalaba. Khawala went to the Prophet ﷺ and complained that her husband had divorced her using dhihar. And this is an old, if you're not familiar with this, it is when the husband tells his wife, you are like the back of my mother. So it is a very oppressive situation where the woman cannot leave. She's not divorced in the real way, but there's no relationship with the husband. So he did this. The Prophet, initially, she went to the Prophet, and the Prophet ﷺ reminded her that her husband was an old man who was also her cousin. So have mindfulness of Allah about him. But according to Aisha radiallahu anha, before she left the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verses in Surah Al-Mujadala in response. And these verses at the beginning of the surah are, Allah has indeed heard and accepted the statement of the woman who pleads with thee concerning her husband and carries her complaint in prayer to Allah. And Allah always hears the arguments between both sides among you. For Allah hears and sees all things. If any men among you divorce their wives by the heart, calling them mothers, they cannot be their mothers. None can be their mothers except those who gave them birth. And in fact, they use words both iniquitous and false. But truly Allah is one that blots out sins and forgives again and again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heard the pleas of Khawala up in the heavens, and later during the rule of Umar bin Khattab, he was walking with an attendant when Khawala came up to him and boldly said, when you were young, we called you Umar. Then when you were older, we called you Umar. And now we called you Commander of the Faithful, Amir al-Mu'mineen. And then she left. So the attendant was amazed at her boldness and asked Umar, how could he keep silent and let her talk to him like that? And Umar replied, if she spoke to me for the whole day, I would listen to her. Do you know who she was? Allah received a surah about her. And if Allah can listen to her from the heavens, then who am I not to listen to her? And this is something I think we need to take a lesson from this. And that a lot of times we are told to just be patient, have sabr, have sabr. We forget that sabr does not mean patience. Sabr means patience, but it also means perseverance. There are times in our life that we need to have patience, like Ayub, when he was suffering with the illness, and we need to have that type of patience, that type of sabr. But there are times in life when we need to have sabr, which is perseverance, which is like the perseverance, the sabr that Nuh alayhi salam showed when he preached and he stood firmly against injustice, and he basically stood firmly for what was right and preached for 950 years. That is the sabr that we need to have in this type of situation. Also, during the time of Umar bin Khattab, there's so many examples of women that those in Canada actually need to hear about. During the time of Umar bin Khattab, he appointed a woman, Shafa bint Abdullah, as the supervisor of the bazaar. So that's like what? Minister of Internal Affairs? Also, during when he was the Khalifa, a woman stood up at the masjid when he was so concerned that the mahr was going up and up and up, and he declared that he needed to put a cap on it because it was getting too exorbitant. A woman argued with him in the masjid. She stood up and said that he had no right to do that. She proved her point and caused him to declare in the presence of people that a woman is right and Umar is wrong. So these are the examples, and these are the role models that we grew up with. And these are the role models that we need to remember. We have to look at that when we talk about education. When I was doing my PhD, and I grew up in an academic environment, we were always encouraged to have an education, a higher education. When I was 5 years old, I knew I wanted to have a PhD. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I wanted a PhD. I did not want to be a doctor, that kind of doctor. And then when I was an undergrad, we'd always have people, that were around. There were women that were pursuing graduate studies. They were pursuing PhDs, sometimes by themselves, sometimes with their husbands, sometimes raising families. The woman who named me, Tanta Hada Bayumi, did her PhD with her husband in Switzerland, raising 3 children. So these are the examples that I grew up with. Way back in the 7th century, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ declared that the pursuit of knowledge is obligatory on every Muslim, whether you are male or female. The right of females to seek knowledge is not different from that of males. And that is in a hadith. Seeking knowledge is mandatory for every Muslim. And even though he himself was illiterate, apparently, the Prophet ﷺ had instructors to teach his wives how to read. Even though he was illiterate, and there is hikmah behind why he needed to be illiterate with respect to the revelation, but he made sure that his wives were educated. So this declaration was very clear, and throughout the early times of history, it was implemented. One of the most influential scholars of Islam was his wife, Aisha bint Abi Bakr, radiallahu anha, who narrated over 2,000 ahadith. I think that's 1/3 of all the hadith. Many of those dealt with intimate aspects of personal life that only she would know. She was proficient in fiqh. She was proficient in medicine, in poetry. Senior companions of the Prophet ﷺ would even come up to her to ask her about matters of inheritance. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, men and women would travel to learn from her because she was considered a great scholar of Islam. Her house was a school and an academy, and many of her students were women. So this recognition of female scholarship and women's participation in academia is something that's been encouraged and practiced throughout the majority of Islamic history. We have a rich tradition of female scholarship in Muslim history, but unfortunately it has been lost. But inshallah, I see that it is being revived today. The Al-Fihri sisters. So let's go, we're going now, coming closer and closer. Recently, I learned about the Al-Fihri sisters, Maryam and Fatima, who were brought up in Morocco after their family migrated from Qurawain or Tunisia. Using the inheritance received, so we'll look at the type of women these are. Using the inheritance received from their father, these two sisters financed different projects. Maryam noticed there was a lack of space for the increasing numbers of worshippers in Fez. So she used her part of the inheritance to build Al-Andalus Masjid in 859. Then there was her sister Fatima. And I have a feeling Hassam has talked about this yesterday. I didn't catch his talk. But her sister Fatima, her objective was grander. She wanted to build the largest mosque in Morocco, but then she expanded this vision to build the oldest existing and continually operating educational institution in the world, the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, which opened its doors in 857. I was born, raised, educated, and work at Queen's University, which I believe is the oldest institution in Canada, but it's only as old as the time of Queen Victoria, the 1800s. This institution opened its doors in 857, a millennium before Queen's University. And there are some that claim that this is the first and longest running university in the world that was founded by a woman. This institution sparked an educational revolution and sparked an era of learning and exploration. And the university didn't just teach Islam and Quran. The university expanded to all subjects alongside Quran and jurisprudence. They learned grammar, rhetoric, logic, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, chemistry, the humanities. It did it all. This is the first university. So the Muslim women in our history were intelligent. They were social activists. They were nurturers. They were academics, and they were integral members of the community. They were businesswomen. They were scholars. They were outspoken. If you read anything about Aisha radiallahu anha and Hafsa radiallahu anha, you know that our women are outspoken and they're warriors. And if I would like to say, we have so many examples of women in history that I personally take as role models. And there are many of them that are actually described at RABBA.org. If you are teaching or if you just want to learn about Muslim women in history, that is an amazing website to go to. So I'm just going to stop there because I know that Iftu has some questions that she wants to talk about.
Mashallah, Jazakallah khairan. That was really just very touching and very powerful, mashallah. I was just taking notes because I wanted to make sure I caught as many gems as possible. So I was just, you touched on some of the questions I'd prepared. So I just wanted to kind of go over the fact that there's a breadth of examples of women, powerful, beautiful examples of women in our Islamic history. And you, like you said, just named a handful, mashallah, Khadija radiallahu anha, Aisha and the wives of the Prophet, the first martyr Sumayya, which was actually, mashallah, like something I just learned, and Khawala, who was the only woman who, subhanAllah, had a whole surah, revealed and addressing her question directly, subhanAllah, and we're going to be reciting that surah to the end of time, subhanAllah. So these are really just powerful examples that you were able to share with us, mashallah. Jazakallah khair. And I think what I really appreciated as well is that you opened with talking about how the deen really does preserve and protect not just women's rights, but also gender equity. And this idea of female scholarship is also something that's very rich within the Islamic tradition. And so you've already touched on how our beautiful and perfect deen is able to build and grow role models, because in our very ethical and that in our value system, it's the beauty of the deen, where we build characters based on the Quran and Sunnah, right? And so there's no way you can't have beautiful people, right, that are like role models. So mashallah. So I guess I'll start maybe with a more personal question, inshallah, if you're comfortable. And reading your biography, Dr. Mona, I just noticed that there are so many different roles that you play, subhanAllah. So I want to kind of shift towards you being a role model in and of yourself, mashallah, in this day and age for women like myself. I can see that you are an academic, mashallah, a researcher. You are a leader within your organization that you work for. You are a community leader. You have a position at the masjid. You're a teacher, mashallah. You are a mother. It also seems, I think, going through your Twitter as well, just kind of do a little more research, I noticed that you have a lot of causes that you're passionate about. And so you speak out on a lot of different issues as well, mashallah. And the list goes on. So subhanAllah, forgive me if I'm forgetting anything. But I'm actually curious, as a modern day role model, how do you balance, subhanAllah, these roles, first of all, and how does it feel? And I'll have a more follow-up questions to that, but we'll start there, inshallah.
Okay. First of all, I do not consider myself a role model, and I don't think people should live their life like I do, because balance, I think, is something that we are all struggling with. And like I said, I think the way that I live my life is the way that I was raised, in that, I have a lot of older sisters that I grew up in the shadow of, holding the coattails of in my community. And because we are a small community, our parents were very involved in the community. So we watched our parents. Our parents were our teachers. Our parents were on the board of the masjid before it was a masjid, of the community. So we watched our parents within Kingston, and I consider them all, my moms. Of course, my mom is, first and foremost. And I think just the way that you see them, and like I said, it is a unique situation, because we are a small community. And so it was like, it's really like being raised in a village. And I think in terms of work-life balance, and I do have to give a disclaimer that my family lives with my parents. So I have grandparent support in a small town where everything is 10 minutes away. The furthest I have to drive is 20 minutes. Which is why my kids are able to do multiple extracurricular, because it doesn't take long to get anywhere. I do have, grandparents, uncle. I have many drivers in my household. And I will say my husband, travels a lot. So it's just, he was only here on weekends. So I have that as one less thing that I have to worry about. I don't have to cook because my mom is here. So that's the thing. And I think one of the things in living in North America is that we become very isolated in nuclear families. Growing up without an extended family, our community became our extended families. And so, we did have our tantes and our ammus and our uncles and aunties and things supporting each other as families. But now that, we've gone another generation, I have the advantage of an intergenerational family. Not everybody has that advantage. And that needs to be taken into account, I think. The other thing is I grew up, with the central thing that I really I take to heart is that the Surah Al-Asr, when it's talking about you know, that verily humanity is in loss except those who have faith and do good deeds. And that's why I say, again, my chapter in that book, activism is a part of life. That is the way that we were raised, in that, you know, you can't just sit in your home and pray. That faith has to be coupled with good deeds. And we watched our parents, and, you know, if you needed something to be done in the community, if it's not being done, you make an effort to get it done. And a lot of the things that we do, and in terms of balance, we're going back to balance. I'm digressing, but I think the way that I have children, that I would like to have the same type of activities and more that I had growing up. I want my children to want to go to the masjid. So when I was in my 20s, is when the masjid was built in Kingston. I was 25 when the masjid was built, but my younger brother was 7. And when he was 7, my father said, you know what, we don't have anything for the kids in the community. We have the youth group, we have the family things, but we don't have something that's specifically for the kids. So let's start something for the kids. So we started the Muslim Kids Club. And that's gone through different iterations. Now it's called the Muslim Children's Circles, or MC squared, coming at you at the speed of light. But the things that I take on, and this is one of the ways that I try to balance, and I'm not balanced at all, I'm just saying, is that I stopped being the youth group advisor when I had kids because it was taking away from family time. I started teaching again because I would be teaching at the same time that my children were at school. Not all the time, because we did have some differences, but that was the intent, was to try. I'm at the school, I'm there with them teaching. I'm doing the children's circle because my child is there. And so it's a way to spend time with your family, but also contribute to the community in things that need to be done, right? It doesn't always work. And like I said, it's a hard balance. I personally do not sleep very much, but also that whole thing about how we as a community need to start relying on each other the way that we're supposed to. That's the thing with, you know, we say back home, we have all your extended family. Over here, your extended family is your community. And I think we need to connect our hearts and see each other like that. If I need something, that I should be able to call up my sister and it's like, hey, can you pick up? You know, can you pick him up from this? Or, you know, I'm really having a hard time. Can you do this? I have the advantage of having my family, but we need to do that. And the other thing is, we do, you know, it's very hard to get imbalanced and do things outside a lot and, you know, neglect your family. And I'm sure I do that. I know I do that. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that in addition to these things, yes, it's very important to contribute to your community. And it's a lot easier if more people would contribute to the community. And so that is the thing, that as members of a community, especially in North America, we need to realize that the masjid is not a service for you. The masjid is your community. And in order to make your community thrive, everybody has to do their part. And that is something that we have to change in the mentality of community, because in that way, then you spread the work and people don't get burned out. And that is a problem within activists, is that they, you know, because you feel the need, we need to do this. There's a hole, let's fill that hole. And those of us who are brought up at a certain era, I think we're all like that you know, that's just the way that we're raised. But we have to remind ourselves, and I think many of us have had to remind ourselves, that the Prophet ﷺ told us that your body has a right on you, your family has a right on you. And that's why it's good to have your mom and your dad around to remind you to do that. But also, like I said, my sleep is not, I don't sleep that much, but that's just the way that I am. So like I said, you have to decide on what your situation is. Don't be so scared so that you don't do anything for your community, because we do all need to contribute, but you'll learn what you can do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts barakah in your time and in your energy. And somehow it will get done, inshallah. I've always seen that if you do your best, inshallah, somehow you'll get it done. You just have to try.
Mashallah. And it just always warms my heart when you bring it back to the deen and how, the Prophet ﷺ taught us how to kind of try to achieve that balance as best we can. And like you said, having tawakkul in Allah and just trying to do whatever you can to invite those blessings in your life, inshallah. So mashallah, yeah. And I also want to emphasize as well the importance of community. SubhanAllah, SubhanAllah, like, it is so important. And I think that should be the goal, I think, of the ummah, is to try our best to try to build those small knit communities within the bigger community, and that's how things branch out. So what a great reminder, mashallah. And since you kind of brought it up, activism. So I wanted to know, what does activism mean to you? What role does it play in your life? How does it fit in with being a role model? And do you have a lot of activist role models that you look up to?
So like I said, for me, I don't consider myself an activist because I think that whole concept of, it's amanu wa amilu salihat. Your faith has to be coupled with doing good deeds, right? And I think that's just the way that we live our lives. That is part of how you live your life as a Muslim, and that you need to translate your faith into action. What that is, and the other hadith another hadith actually, so when I was in Islamic school, our teacher would ask us every week to recite a hadith. And so I would always say, when a prophet, when the Prophet ﷺ said that when you see a wrong, an evil action, you stop it with your hand. So, you do something about it. If you can't, then you stop it with your tongue. You speak out or write about it. And if you can't, then you hate it in your heart. And that is the weakest of faith. There was another one, my friend, who is now my aunt, would recite, and we would switch up when we had to change. But I think that is a very powerful lesson that Prophet ﷺ taught us, in that we are not allowed to be bystanders. Being a bystander is actually the weakest of faith. And if we can, we need to do our best, to the best of our ability, according to your situation, that when we see a wrong, that we need to try and put a stop to that. So I think, like I said, it really has to do, that is the way that, the kids of my generation in my town were raised. We were, when the Gulf War happened, we were all on the street downtown. They gave me the megaphone, and we went down the street. I mean, I was in university, so I wasn't a kid. But those type of activist things were how I grew up. Our parents, when we were young, our parents were very active in the school board to ensure, and it wasn't just them. It was like, people from all different cultures. At a time when they were getting rid of the Lord's Prayer in school, that group of individuals, including our parents, came up with a book that had sayings from all traditions, and faith and non-faith traditions, so that when I was in high school, we used that book during morning announcements, and we would recite, and every Friday the Muslims went down and would say something from the book during the morning announcements. We had Christian, Jewish, humanist, all of it. And that is what my parents did, and so that is also a form of activism, because they cared what the children were going through in school. They cared about their children's education. So, I mean, there's all sorts of types of activism, right? And like I said, we look at our parents for that. And so you're saying, who are the activists that I looked up to? Obviously, my parents and all the parents of that I grew up with. There's one particular woman that I grew up with, is Sister Khadija Hafaji, Allah yarhamha. So for those of you who know, and I think most people know who Sister Khadija was, Sister Khadija came to Canada from South Africa around the same time as my father, in the late 1960s. So when there's a huge mass immigration to Canada because, you know, there's the whole concept of multiculturalism. She came to Canada by herself in 1968. She grew up in South Africa. And I think one of the reasons why we connected so well with Sister Khadija is that she would always remind us, I grew up just like you. I was a Muslim in South Africa. And she said, I was a colored Muslim in South Africa. So she knew what it was like being a minority. So she worked as a teacher in Ottawa and she taught middle school. And I remember one time she was telling us a story about how she's like, I used to wear, she was independent. She did what she wanted. And she would tell us, it's like, you know, I used to wear saris. I used to wear saris when I was teaching. And then one day I looked at myself and she basically said, nope. I'm not going to say exactly what she said because she probably wouldn't like that. And she started, you know, to cover. And she said, you know, I'm gonna dress like this. And she taught in middle school, you know, wearing what she wanted. She was one of the pioneers in the community in Ottawa, but she was also one of the pioneers in North America. And I remember she used to come to Kingston to do mother-daughter programs. So we have these sleepovers at one of the tents houses. And she told us the story about how once there was, this is before Minna, obviously, that once there was a youth program down in the States. So she grabbed her car and she grabbed some youth and she drove the youth down to the States for this youth program. And some of those were like some of our older sisters. I think Iman Fahmi and Umayma Faris, I think were two of the ones that were in that car. But she did that by herself and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. She also told us a story about how back in the day she was invited to speak at and on a panel. So she was sitting there at the table. And of course, the majority of the men stood up and left because there was a woman on the panel. And so Dr. Badawi told her, no, you need to stay. And if you know Uncle, you know, Dr. Jamal Badawi, you know, he's the gender equity guy. So Mashallah, he supported her and there were other brothers that supported her and she stayed there and she spoke. She was the first woman on Majlis al-Shura of ISNA. She represented, I don't know if she represented Canada, but she went to the Beijing Conference of Women and then she went and she visited some of the Muslims in northern China. And at that time she was married. So uncle went with her and they visited with the people. And one of the things about Sister Khadija is that she didn't have her own children, but she raised generations of children and youth. She helped raise us. And she did not marry until she was probably my age, like probably in her 50s. Activism was her life. And I remember she would say that this is one of her criteria for getting married, and that her husband would have to respect that this is her life. This is her breath. She can't live without doing this. And she never stopped until, you know, she maybe slowed down. There were so many things that she started. May Allah bless her and make them sadaqah jariyah with her. And honestly, we have had a tremendous loss with her loss. May Allah preserve her and raise her up to Jannat al-Firdaus. Like I said, she basically taught us what it was like to be a Muslim woman and how to claim your rights and how to continuously educate yourself. Another person that always comes to mind who has always also passed away within the last 10 years is Sister Amina Assalami. Sister Amina Assalami is someone that I met when I was my first Minna retreat when I was 16 years old, but down in Plainfield, Illinois, at ISNA headquarters. And I remember she was just being so impressed by this amazing, you know, tall, proud Muslim woman. And she'd tell us the story about how, you know, she became Muslim in the 70s. And how she, you know, I think when she first said Shahada, she said that she wasn't going to wear hijab, but I'm not going to wear that. She would tell us stories about how when she studied Quran, she had 6 translations of the Quran. Because we forget that we just pick up one and read the translation, but it's not what it means. You need to read the 6 translations to even get close to maybe what the meaning is in Arabic. So she, you know, her faith was so strong. Her becoming Muslim caused her to lose her kids. She lost custody of her kids because she lost her job. She lost custody of her kids. But Allah rewarded her because, you know, later on in life, you know, I know I was there when one of her sons took Shahada and became Muslim. So, and she was constantly working for women's rights. She was constantly working to show the Muslim presence in North America. She is the reason why we have an Eid stamp, the first Eid stamp in the States. And now we have one in Canada, right? And she was the founder of the Islamic, what is it called? The Islamic International Union of Muslim Women in the United States. So she was always everywhere. She had cancer twice. She had cancer, she had bone cancer. And I remember her, and she fought and she won both times. But I remember she came here and she was in a wheelchair at that time. And she loved our masjid because our masjid was built with a ramp. And she said, that's a really good one. She said, you know what, that's a really good racing ramp. And she showed us how you could take your wheelchair and race down that ramp. And she let other people use her wheelchair to race down that. So she had this joie de vivre because she loved Islam and she loved her life. And so, you know, it's that sense of being unapologetically Muslim and proud to be a woman. Those are the things that I think we learned from Sister Khadija and Sister Amina, and the fact that, you know, how you work for your community and how you work for the sake of Allah. And, you know, these are the examples that we grew up with. So we have huge, I'm going to say hijabs to fill, not because they have left a void that many of us will need to take the mantle on to fill that void.
Mashallah, tabarakallah, subhanallah. I just wanted to quickly say, actually, wow, 2 names that I, inshallah, will be looking into more after this talk, inshallah. SubhanAllah, we actually, at the end of last night's session, Brother Hassam actually mentioned, he emphasized that really it's about gathering the local stories of the local women in our community that we go unnamed a lot of the time, right? So I'm so happy, alhamdulillah, that you took the time to honor these 2 women. May Allah have mercy on their souls, and just spread the khair that they tried to spread in their life. So mashallah, tabarakallah, alhamdulillah. And also, I honestly think that we should take note of that tagline. We have huge hijabs to fill. I think you just gave us a tagline, inshallah, for 2022. So
okay.
Yeah, we have to give all credit to you, Dr. Mona, mashallah. So with that, we are going to bring the session to a close, inshallah. So before I do that, I did say that we would try to get to some comments or questions. We have a lot of people saying salam alaikum, so I'll give you an opportunity to return salams, mashallah. I even have somebody by the name of Iram Afsar who says salam specifically. I don't know her, so mashallah, mashallah, tabarakallah. So, but there was one specific question that was asking, what's the name of the website to find the stories that you'd mentioned? So I think you mentioned the name of a website where people could go to reference more of these stories that you'd mentioned.
So that's RABBA.org. So RABBA.org. And it's actually expanded since I first went there. They have a curriculum with handouts. I mean, it's something that you could use to teach at school.
MashaAllah.
What I do, and this is just a warning to my grade 11, 12 Islamic studies class, what I do every year is in March, I try to give them an essay to pick a Muslim woman in history, and that's where I send them to start. They actually do have a profile on Sister Amina. So it goes from like the Fihris and Nana Asma'u and Razia Sultan and Sister Amina Silmi. So it's like spans time.
So inshallah, again, I'm having more ideas on the spot. We should have you back, inshallah, invite you back to maybe go through some of this material, inshallah. I think that would be a great idea, inshallah, for a future session. So alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, we have come to a close for our session this evening. I would like to give my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Monarahman, Mashallah, tabarakallah, jazakallah khairan, for your contribution, barakallah fi, for all of your gems and your pearls of wisdom from your own experience and from the history that you shared with us. So may Allah reward you immensely for your time and for your efforts. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Monarahman.
And I would say, I was just going to say that if you really want to talk about work-life balance, you need to talk to Iram Afsar.
Inshallah, mashallah. We definitely take all, we invite all sisters and welcome all sisters to the program, mashallah. So myself on mute. So before I sign off, I'd like to ask all of you who are watching right now to follow Nisa Helpline on Facebook and Instagram, inshallah. We have some exciting programming happening in the month of November, inshallah. So there'll be some announcements if you just check out our Instagram page and our Facebook page. And definitely look out for more details because we have an amazing wrap-up end of year event coming up, inshallah, and we'll have some details coming out about that soon. You will not want to miss it, inshallah. So again, I'd like to wish everybody a very happy and lovely, restful evening, inshallah. Thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.